this is mainly us. All right, my friends, good to be with you here. We'll pull up Genesis. I've got the recording from last week, but I haven't had a chance to put it up on YouTube. I'll get that going here this week. All right, so we're going to talk about the first good old-fashioned Genesis, and especially the first chapter. We've got to talk a little bit about literal versus metaphorical readings, right? Because we all have those friends who says God created the world in exactly 7 days, right? It's 7 days. It says so in the Bible. You got to know that's exactly how it was. The whole world created in 7 days, not 8 billion years or whatever the latest number is. From science, it's this very quick turnaround. So that's one of the great questions for many folks, is how to deal with stories in the Bible, especially Genesis, and especially these verses, what they call the Primeval History, the first about 8 chapters that are all basically before Abraham. All those stories about why there's a multiplicity of languages, how the flood happened, what happened with creation, right? All these early stories become very problematic for people because they don't know if they should take them literally, or if it's purely a metaphor, or if it's some combination of both. People always get confused on that. So should we read it as a literal account, or do we understand it as a metaphor, right? As some sort of entree into understanding God on a deeper level. So I personally think we have to view all the stories to the greater question is, what does this mean about God and about us, right? Those are the greater questions, because that's what they're writing the Bible for. And that's true for all the books of the Bible. The 39 in the Old Testament, the 27 in the New Testament, right? Every single one of those books is concerned on one level or another about what does this say about God and what does it say about humanity? And often what does it say about God and humanity, right? That's what they're usually wrestling with. Even if it's a story all about a bunch of brothers fighting each other, there's still God still in the midst of that somehow, and bringing up all kinds of questions with it, right? So every story in the Bible was written to say something about God and or humanity. How do we engage that? That's the larger question than necessarily getting into, quite frankly, getting into the weeds about, is this a literal interpretation, metaphorical interpretation? Is this sort of a pattern? I mean, all these different kinds of things that people will talk about. I'm positive that all these stories have been told time and time again to help us understand something about God and about humanity instead, right? So what we're going to do today, we're going to look at that first story of creation. There are 2 stories of creation, right? Chapter 1 is the first story. Chapter 2 is the second story. Or for those who don't know it, chapter 1 is pretty much the 7 days of creation. It spills over into the first 2 verses of chapter 2. Then chapter 2 is the story of Adam and Eve, in a separate story of creation that has a different purpose and meaning, right? People tend to conflate them all into one, but they're pretty separate, certainly both in their meaning and in their intent and writing. So what I want to do today is look at it literally. And I mean, actually look at it literally, not interpretively literally, but what does it literally say? Not a selective literalism. What I mean by that is, people will go, oh, God created the earth in 7 days, and it's right there in the Bible, and you need to learn your Bible. Well, that's partially true, and it's partially not true, because they didn't read it literally. So you'll see what I mean in a minute when we walk through it. But I just want to say, again, the more fundamental question is, what does this story tell us about God and about us, about humanity, right? Quick note, I'm going to use, for the translation today at least, the Shockin' Bible by Everett Fox as the translation. If you've never heard of it, it's only the first, there's only 2 volumes for it. The first is for the Pentateuch, the second is for Judges and the Minor Prophets. But he really focuses on the story in a very different way in the translation. He is obsessed with the literary work of the Old Testament. That is, he loves alliteration, he loves poetry, he loves rhyming, he loves all those kinds of things. And when he translates from the Hebrew, he tries to preserve those nuances over necessarily the meaning. That makes sense. He's trying to get the meaning right too, but he's also trying to get it in a poetic form so we hear the poetry of what's being said versus just a rote sort of translation that gives you word for word kind of transfer. The New Revised Standard Version tends to be a little bit more on that side of trying to go with a literal word for word kind of this is what it means translation. This is much more an attempt to be poetic. And quite frankly, I love it because I love hearing a little bit more of the nuance of the text. So again, he's trying to create that poetry, that lyricism, that feeling of the Hebrew text. And you'll hear it very quickly because it's got a different way of speaking than, quite frankly, English does. All right, any questions before I jump in here? All right, here we go. 1:1. At the beginning of God's creating of the heavens and the earth, when the earth was wild and waste, darkness over the face of ocean, rushing spirit of God, hovering over the face of the waters. So here's what we got. So, right, the opening lines are literally God is over the waters, right? So we have to start there. If we're going to look again, I'm going to go a literal translation. This is what we've got. God, the image should be God in some form hovering over the ocean, hovering over the deep, hovering over water, and nothing else. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw the light, that it was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was setting and there was dawning one day. So we have God, and now we have day and night, right? We have this sort of idea of separating the light from darkness. And I think we can say, even if we want to go super metaphorical, it's purely intended in this case to be light and day and night, not some sort of grand metaphorical question of good and evil. I think God's purely saying, I'm separating the light and the dark. Maybe you can go into the metaphorical for good and evil, but I'm not sure that that's as much what the point is. All right. Then God said, let there be a dome amid the waters, and let it separate water from waters. And God made the dome and separated the waters that were below the dome from the waters that were above the dome. It was so. God called the dome heaven. There was setting, there was dawning, the second day. So this is one of those things people never realize. God effectively blows a bubble in the ocean or holds the oceans back, right? So you have water above, you have water below, and you have this light and darkness. 2 days into creation, we don't have land, we don't have anything. We just have this sort of bubble amidst, right? So the waters are separated, and that's all we have. So then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered to one place, and let the dry land be seen. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout forth with sprouting growth, plants that seed forth seeds, fruit trees that yield fruit after their kind, and in which is their seed upon the earth. It was so. The earth brought forth sprouting growth, plants that seed forth seeds after their kind, trees that yield fruit, in which is their seed after their kind. God saw that it was good. There was setting, there was dawning, the third day. All right, so we have both the creation of earth, or at least the dry land can be seen. There's almost the implication, right, the way it's said, that there was dry land before we did, or there was land somewhere in the bubble, but we just couldn't see it. Now we can, because God's pushed the water that's in the bubble off to the side to be the seas. You have the earth, and then we don't tend to use it this way, these terms this way anymore. We call it the sky, right? But God's absolutely calls anything above the dome the heavens, right? Those were the heavens when you looked up. We probably should call it that more. It's a nice way to think of the space around us, right? And so very quickly, God both creates dry ground and then he also puts plants on it, right? All the fruit trees, the bushes, the plants all grow up on the third day. We're moving pretty quick. Day 1 and 2, now we're into 3. Suddenly we've got all of this. God said, let there be lights in the dome of the heavens to separate the day from the night, so they may be signs for set times, for days and years. Let them be for lights in the dome of the heavens to provide light upon the earth. It was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light for ruling the day and the smaller light for ruling the night and the stars. God placed them in the dome of the heavens to provide light upon the earth, to rule the day and the night, to separate the light from the darkness. God saw that it was good. There was setting, there was dawning, the 4th day. All right, so inside the dome, not outside, not where God is, where there's day and night, and there's sort of separate ideas. Inside the dome, we have the moon and the sun and the stars, right? That's within the dome to provide light on the earth. And why? Because it's to set time. So now if we are taking this absolutely literally, by the Bible's own mention, day and night for the first 3 days are uncertain. Because we define days and nights by how long is the sun up and how long is the sun down, right? That's a 24-hour period, or it's a rotation of the earth. But even in Genesis, days 1, 2, and 3 happen before time, right? So I'm not getting really into the argument pro or con. This is if we're going to truly read it literally, it's right there. We set time by the heavens. We know that by where the sun is in the sky, by where the moon is in the sky. So if it doesn't show up until day 4 and God's doing all this work before that, how long were those days? I think it's fair to say it was a period of time, but an undetermined period of time. And even more importantly, I don't think the person telling the story particularly cares. That's not what's important in the story. But just to name it, right? By the way, I apologize for my rudimentary drawings. I was using Microsoft Art, and that was about as good as I could pull out. So they work. You know what we're looking at anyway. So then God said, let the waters swarm with a swarm of living beings, and let fowl fly above the earth across the dome of the heavens. God created the great sea serpents and all living beings that crawl about, and with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and all winged fowl after their kind. God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, bear fruit and be many, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the fowl be many on earth. There was setting and there was dawning the 5th day. All right, so now we got the little fishes in the sea, we got some birds in the air. We also have things that crawl about. I am not sure if that's meant to be a sort of Hebrew reference to things that crawl about in the sea that they don't exactly know what they are, like maybe shrimp and clams and stuff, or if it means animals on the land that crawl about. That's not completely clear. But if you're listening to the text, what does happen is God blesses all of these animals, right? There's lots of conversations about who gets blessed in the Bible. God expressly blesses the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and all after their kind to go and prosper, right? God didn't bless the plants that way, but God blesses the animals The birds. All right. So God said, let the earth bring forth living beings after their kind, herd animals, crawling things, and the wildlife of the earth after their kind. It was so. And God made the wildlife of the earth after their kind, and the herd animals after their kind, and all crawling things of the soil after their kind. God saw that it was good. God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the heavens, the animals, and all the earth, and all crawling things that crawl about upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created it. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, be fruit, and be many, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the heavens, and all living things that crawl about upon the earth. God said, there it goes. Here, I give you all plants that bear seeds that are upon the face of the earth, and all trees in which there is tree fruit that bears seeds. For you shall they be for eating. And also for all the living things of the earth, for all the fowl of the heavens, and all that crawls upon the earth in which there is living being, all green plants for eating. It was so. Now God saw all that he had made, and here it was exceedingly good. There was setting, there was dawning, the sixth day. All right, so the sixth day, God created all the animals of the earth, including humanity. We are the last in the list, but at the same time, we are part of the sixth day. We're not separate from the list, right? God blesses all of us and all the animals, gives us dominion. And that's a word that obviously lots of folks wrestle with now because we tend to have abused that. Sometimes the translation will be stewards. I give you stewardship over them instead of dominion. There's some argument about which word should be used there from the Hebrew. It most likely is dominion from what I've read and looked at. But it definitely has a connotation of taking care of it, not of destroying it or exploiting it, right? So while we get dominion and authority, I don't think we were supposed to be getting carte blanche to do whatever we want to destroy. Thus were finished the heavens and the earth with all their array. God had finished on the seventh day his work that he had made, and then he ceased on the seventh day from all his work that he had made. God gave the seventh day his blessing, and he hallowed it, for on it he ceased from all his work that by creating God had made. So there you go. There's the actual literal reading, right? The literal reading for the first is that there are 7 days of creation, which we know. But again, it's not until the fourth day we know how long a day is. And we are in a bubble in the great waters of the universe, right? That's what we are. It took an unknown amount of time because day 4 is when we get the lights that measure days and years, proving that even the person telling the story sort of goes, it took a while. I don't care. God did it in God's time. God created with words, and humanity is one part of creation endowed with authority, right? Those are the things, if we are taking it absolutely literally, we have to say are the realities of it, right? That's how the story goes. There it is, right? How does this come back? So if this is our world, God is up there above the waters, hovering above the waters. There's the heavens, there's the earth, there's the waters that have been spread above and below. People always say that Noah and his ark were flooded because of the 40 days of rain, right? 40 days and 40 nights of rain. But they didn't read the text. Because for the flood, then burst all the well springs of the great ocean, and the sluices of heaven opened up. Is the line from Genesis chapter 7. It rains for 40 days and 40 nights, but basically the world floods because God pops the bubble. Right? God, who keeps the forces of chaos at bay. Now we're going into the metaphorical, right? But what we're saying is God keeps the chaos is defined as the oceans, as these great deeps and waters. And if you're a desert people, as the Israelites are, then water is a terrifying thing, especially big expanses of it. You need it, but you aren't real interested in getting out on the ocean. That's a terrifying space. So in their cosmology and their understanding of the world, chaos is water, right? And so God holds back that chaos. So the flood is literally God removing his protection and allowing the chaos to rush back in, to allow the waters to rush back in. And before you think that's the end of it, what does it mean? What does it say about God? What does it say about us? Then at the same time, that's why we shouldn't be surprised that God shows up. And how does he save Israel on that Red Sea shore? He holds back the water again. How does he get people into the promised land? He holds back the waters of the Jordan again. Should we be surprised that when he shows up as a human, he begins his ministry by getting into water and coming out again? Or he walks on the water, or he calms the storms. These are all part of that same Hebrew cosmology of understanding our world as being inside water and that chaos being personified by water. And how does God prove that God is God? By holding back the chaos, by creating order out of that unruliness, and by literally controlling water and turning it into something more fruitful, like, say, wine. Right? All right, so how does that inform it? How does it inform the rest of Scripture, right? There's the question. Like I said, the Jordan, the Red Sea, all that kind of stuff. So thoughts, I just threw the entire first chapter of Genesis at you. I'm going to stop the share for a second and just let us talk. Thoughts on, has anybody heard that story the way we actually tell the story before, or have we skipped over these things?
Like that, but I'm also sort of distressed that it leaves out a lot of the God said or God spoke.
Right.
And of course, being a big speaker myself, I like it when God speaks.
But to whom would he have spoken, or she? To whom would God have spoken?
In my case, Stephen, it doesn't make any difference. I talk to the cat.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I like the reinforcement, or for me, the enforcement of the point, because it's the first I've ever considered it, that we have no idea how long the first 3 days were, or 4, whichever it is. That's kind of an aha moment for me.
Yeah.
Has everybody also noticed that in the beginning we were all vegetarians?
No.
Well, it's the truth. In the beginning, we were all vegetarians. Okay.
There were only plants and no animals.
Well, there were animals, but they weren't for eating. If you listen carefully, okay, the plants and the fruit were for food. Okay, were the food source, not animals. We weren't carnivores. We were omnivores. Okay, so there.
Interesting.
That's very interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. I hadn't really looked at it that way. One of the things that always makes me think about Genesis, and some readings I was doing here about 2 or 3 weeks ago, NASA has sent up a new space telescope because Hubble's ending the end of its time. And this new resolution on this new telescope is so fine that they're seeing about 20 billion light years beyond as far as they could see now, and it's full of galaxies.
Hmm.
So it means we're even a smaller bit of this whole thing than we thought. Which I think is interesting when you start looking at that and thinking about God creating this. I mean, you know, the question is, are we the only ones? I kind of think we might be.
Might be the only ones.
Mhm. That's how I reconcile this.
Your commentary on or discussion about God separating the waters reminds me of one reading we had in EFM recently that pointed out that this probably doesn't say it quite accurately, but that you have to understand Genesis as being written in the context of the salvation history of the people of Israel, and that it's a story that came after the Exodus story, and the writers go back and explain the creation within the context of God's saving history. And so you get that with part of that, you know, the separation of the waters and all that. What translation are you using?
So that's the Shockin translation of the
Okay.
Shockin Bible. Yeah, Everett Fox. And again, I just like it because it makes you hear it differently.
Mhm.
And it does sort of shocks. That's maybe an unintentional word, right? It does do a little shocking, mainly because it does help you just hear the text a little differently. And as I understand it, it's a little bit closer to the cadence of the Hebrew, if not the meaning. And ultimately, it doesn't change that much. Like Betty said, you don't hear the and God said or God spoke. But at the same time, God is the one speaking throughout, right? God calls it earth, and declares another seas and sky and heavens, and names things left and right. But it doesn't have that same speaking quotient.
There is some speaking in it. I go back to what Brueggemann said about God's call to creation. And I love that. I love that word, that God calls creation into being.
Right. It reminds me of there's the old story about a group of Christians, a group of Buddhists who were talking one day, and they were said we need to read each other's text to understand each other better. And so they were reading the different things. And they came back after a while, and they were talking about what they discovered. And this one Buddhist goes, you know, in our tradition, it's about silence and meditation and reflection. Your God talks a lot.
My kind of God.
He is constantly talking. From the very beginning, one way or another, he's talking.
I think the major question is, are we listening?
Well, amen to that.
Along those lines, do you know an accurate original definition of the word dominion?
I mean, this is one that people are, it's become a huge conversation point because of the environmentalist movement.
Oh, absolutely.
And they
That's
want
exactly
to
why
be
I bring
able
it
to
up.
nail it down and say, this is exactly what it means. My Hebrew is not, I'm pretty good at Greek. Hebrew's awful. I'm awful at it.
Okay.
I'd have to ask the rabbis.
Because your words about it have me weighing the right of dominion versus the responsibility of dominion.
And I would say all the rabbis would argue that while we have the right of dominion, that there's an implied responsibility there, right? That it's not just you get to do whatever you want, destroy the whole place or not keep it for the next generation. But to keep it, especially, and they would point to, the first commandment, right? Which most Christians don't notice, but it's right there in the Genesis story. The first commandment God gives is go forth and be fruitful, go forth and multiply, right? Like that is the first commandment of humanity, is to go out and have more children and more of the world. And so that's a part of that. Why would God say, oh, you have dominion and you can destroy it and do whatever you want with it, when it's supposed to be, your first command is actually to have someone to take it after you.
They have dominion over God's creation, right? This destroying God's creation, I do not think is what is meant.
No, I don't either. But it's sometimes during a lot of the colonial period of our world, for the Western world taking over a lot of or Europe, let's be honest, Europe taking over most of the rest of the world, or invading, those words were used a lot. We have dominion, we have authority, we can take whatever we want and do whatever we want with it, right? That's how it got interpreted. I would argue that while the environmentalists might read a little bit much into it, I think that's closer to the connotation, right? Is not that colonial take over, take control, and it's yours, but no, how do we work together? And the key part, right, of your line is you have dominion of God's creation. It's still God's creation primarily, not ours. We did nothing to create it other than show up on the last day, literally. On the last day, at the last second of creating, we show up.
Next to last day, on the next sixth, we didn't.
Yeah, that's true.
We show up on the sixth day. Now, and we were there for a day of rest on the seventh.
Right. Yeah, we show up to take a nap.
Yeah, exactly. Take a nap. Yeah. What else is new?
Were we an afterthought then? If we were the last thing?
Probably. Probably.
I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but
My response was with a smile and a chuckle too.
He just got everything ready for us, and then Adam and Eve.
Yep. So what does it say about us? What does this creation story say about us? What does it say about God, right? Those are the fundamental questions. I mean, we could do the literal and look at every line and take it apart, which people have done lots, but what is the purpose of telling the story, right? Why do we tell this creation story versus one of 100 others?
I think one of the things it says is that God is just kind of tickled to death with us. But that doesn't mean he doesn't know we can reject. It's a parental kind of thing, where he loves us and creates us and gives us everything that's necessary, and knows we can tear his heart out and rip it apart if we choose to do so.
I was going to wait for a response if you wanted to respond to Betty before I speak, but
Go ahead.
okay.
No.
What does this mean about God? Please understand that we're talking about a monotheistic God. If we understand when this was written, okay, this was the only monotheistic God. There was no other.
Right. Yeah, so there's not the gods fighting over creation, or
Yeah, right.
who creates humanity or gives them wisdom or whatever else, right? It's just one.
Right. Which is what makes this creation story so unique.
Yeah.
As compared to all the other creation stories. Okay. Around the time.
I think it's interesting because I have some very good friends who are Orthodox Jews. And one day we were sitting there and the rabbi said to me, he said, we can be friends and we can work together if you believe in a monotheistic God. Otherwise, we can't work together. And he was adamant. And after that, we became very close friends for a very long time till he died. But I think that's a good point that, you know, almost all of these civilizations had many multiple gods. So the Jews came along and said, yeah, we got one. Billy, you're smiling.
No, I agree. I agree. I agree. What more to add? There's not much to add to that at all.
What an amazing concept. You know, I mean, if we are as fragmented as we probably are, it's much easier to think of a fragmented God rather than a monotheistic God.
Yes.
Days 1 through 5, I think each one closes with God saying, God saw that it was good.
Mhm.
And day 6, on which God has created humankind, ends with, it was very good.
I'm not so sure about that, but that's okay, Lynn.
Well, you believe that God liked everything was all good until we came along, then it was very good.
For a little while.
Yeah. Not for very long. Okay. As subsequent stories are going to reveal.
Right, right. These creations did not obey very well.
Kind of makes you think of Winston Churchill. He said, you know, those Americans, they will try every way but the right way to figure something out, but they will finally get it in the end and get it right, but it'll take them a while to get there. So I guess we're all kind of like that.
Oh my goodness. We make lots of mistakes.
Well, I guess up through the part we've read, so that we go through the Sabbath, that's all from the priestly writer.
Right.
And
Yes.
then we'll move to another writer.
Mhm.
Yep. It goes from priestly to the Yahwist, doesn't it? Is it Jay?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Yahwist.
So we'll look at that next time. We'll get into how we read it. The fun part, we'll do this, and then in the fall, part of Ron Siegel at Temple Sinai and I are going to teach a shared Bible class for about 4 weeks between our congregations to talk about how Christians view that story and how Jews view that story, right? We kind of put into the world evil and all that kind of sin and production, and that is not how Jews view the second story in the least, right? So we're going to have some conversation about how we view it and why we view them differently. So we'll do that, Passover, suffering servant, and the binding of Isaac are the 4 stories we'll look at, because we look at each of those very differently. We actually look at most of the Bible differently, but those are hinge point kind of conversations that we take in different directions. So it's good to hear. It'll be fun to have those conversations with them for sure. So we talked a little bit about what it says about God. What does it say about us in the midst of all this creation? God doing all this creating. We do show up at on the end of the last creating day, at least, not the last day of creation, but the last day of creating, and then rest. What does it say about us? And I guess it says something about the hierarchy, right? We are given dominion. So maybe we're put on the top at some level. What else does it say about us?
Well, that everything we are, we owe to him.
Everything? I struggle with that. I struggle with the everything.
How so? Meaning
Because
even
everything, I'm assuming everything also includes sin, right? And I don't believe that. So it's hard for me to.
Well, at this point, no one had been separated from God yet.
Yeah, right.
We,
Nobody had eaten
But I
any
mean-
meat either. There you go.
I mean, the footnote writer for the study edition at NRSV notes that the individual elements on days 1 through 5 are good, but the whole,
It's very
when
good.
God is finished on day 6, is very good, or I think extremely good in the translation we read today.
I'm going to say a long thing, and y'all can mute me if you want to, but I've spent this whole week thinking about the daddy long legs in my bathroom, that I always thought daddy long legs were just kind, gentle spiders, and I was always very nice to them. And I watched one devour a little bitty bug, and there was no complacency. He spat out the hard parts and went right on his way. And then I realized that I eat steak. And so I'm probably as bad as the daddy long legs. Then as the week goes on, I come to the conclusion that at least I can examine whether I'm as bad as the daddy long legs or not. At least I can think about it. And I think in part, that's what dominion means for us as humans, that we can look at the difference between right and wrong. Does that make any sense at all?
I wonder if the daddy long legs is bad.
Right, I don't.
I don't think he is, because he doesn't have the capacity to be bad. I don't think he's evil. I think the difference is what we have, which is that ability to discern right from wrong, good from evil, however it is.
Yeah, I think that's just the
Steak
way
or
God
don't eat
made
steak.
the daddy long legs. That's kind of his job, to eat the smaller bugs.
But I always thought they were kind of sweet little spiders, and I would be very gentle in taking them by their long legs and putting them outside, and being terrified if I tore off the long leg and all that kind of stuff. They're not, they're just spiders.
Oh, spiders have a job like all kinds of other creatures.
Shall we all fit into the whole cycle of life?
Yeah, I think maybe dominion has something to do with being, they self-aware, sentient, whatever kind of conversation we talk about. Yeah.
I guess the way I look at dominion, I'm just saying this a different way, is really what I'm hearing is God saying to mankind, here's my creation. Take good care of it.
Mhm.
That's what I hear.
Yes, I agree.
Well, I think that's what it is. And I think he gave us the
That's your
ability.
problem with dominion, okay? That word is a killer, okay? So I mean, it
What-
causes
Bill,
more
what are the
problems.
roots of dominion? What is the etymology of dominion? I don't know.
I'm sure it's probably got to do with Dominus in the Latin, right?
I
mean,
would think so, yeah.
Lord and lording it over, having authority.
Or being like God.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found this, I have no idea who this person is or if he or she really has any authority to discuss this, but she's talking about, he or she's talking about the root word, I guess in Hebrew, radah, R-A-D-A-H, which means to subdue. Bill, I don't know how to pronounce this. Had they put a seer, T-S-E-R-E,
Mm-hmm.
2 dots under the resh, they would have the root word Y-A-R-A-D, which means to come down or lower oneself, which is totally different way of thinking about dominion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I sent y'all that link to the extent you care.
This is the challenge of Hebrew. They didn't have vowels. So it's all tradition as to which word is which, to a certain degree, like when you don't have the vowels in a word. It's just, well, we've always read it this way. So they sort of go with that. And then there's also that sort of triliteral root like that, where they'll say, oh, well, if this word was just one letter off, it'd be this, or it could be that. And they sort of will even get into the crux of the meaning to debate it. So I'll always defer to someone else and go, that sounds good. I don't know.
I can't imagine life without vowels.
I can't either.
Aaron, thanks for that bit about Dominion. That's going to be interesting to read.
Yeah.
Interesting, I thought. And Peterson has a piece at the beginning of Genesis, a preamble sort of,
Mm-hmm.
that says everything we think and do and feel is material in a building operation in which we're engaged all our lives long. There's immense significance in everything we do. Our speech and our actions and our prayers are all, every detail of them, involved in this vast building operation, comprehensively known as the kingdom of God. But we don't build the foundation is given and is firmly in place. I don't know, that sort of ties in a little bit, Stefan, to
Mhm.
what we were talking about.
So there you go. One chapter, pretty straightforward, and yet a whole lot of details, right? A whole lot of meaning. But I think that's the point of the story, at least for me, is it does say a lot about God and about us. The point is not as much about a literal telling of creation as it is about understanding more about how God does things and how we relate to God in that doing, right? That's the point of the story, not a scientific explanation, which is there was a big bang and then all the other stuff, right? It's not, that was never the important import of those words. Instead, it's much more, how do we understand God? How do we try to understand what God's about? Even if it's just the beginning story, this is the way to start talking about that monotheistic singular entity who can, with words, create everything out of nothing, or out of just a little bit of something, and transform everything. So it's fun to play with. So next
Bill,
week,
will you put this up on YouTube at some
Yes.
point?
yes,
Okay,
I'll
'cause
I'll put it up.
I had to
Hopefully,
have a 15-minute discussion with my contractors to get today's bad news in the middle of all of this. And
Oh,
it
no.
sounds like I missed some good meaty discussion. So,
we'll put it up. We'll put it up, my friend.
okay,
And we'll pray about the contractor.
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, add them to the intercessory prayer list, please.
I will.
There you go. All right, my friends, anything else before we tune off? All right. Have a great day, my friends. We'll see you next week.
Thanks,
All right.
Bill.
Y'all
Bye.
take
Thank you.
Bye.